In the heart of Kenya, where tradition often silences women's voices, a group of warriors dared to challenge. Between 1970 and the year 2003, they were victims of atrocities that changed their lives forever. Hundreds were brutally raped, and instead of finding support, they were rejected by their own communities, beaten and abandoned by their husbands. It sounds like a movie plot, but it's not. The scenario is real. But in the midst of so much pain, something unexpected emerged. Umoja, a village where women found freedom and strength. Do you think this success would come without consequences? Of course not. Their freedom did not go unnoticed, and the desire for revenge soon spread. The scenario became even darker, and the story took a turn that few could have imagined. Do you want to know what happened? Today's Bello Mundo will take you inside Umoja, a place where the female resistance faces challenges that go far beyond what you might imagine. Number 1. What is Umoja village? To be a woman in Kenya, especially in rural areas, is to face an extremely harsh reality. The country is still deeply patriarchal, and local traditions end up determining the fate of women from a very young age. In these communities, life for women doesn't offer many choices. Physical and emotional abuse are part of everyday life, and the cycle of violence seems to have no end. The chance of escaping it? Almost non-existent. But in the midst of this oppressive reality, a light shines. Vila Umoja, a place inhabited exclusively by women who have said enough and left behind the nightmare of their past lives. Number 2. Samburu culture of forced marriage. To really understand what led to the emergence of this female-dominated village, we need to understand how things work there. As we've already said, being a woman in Kenya is already a battle, but multiply that battle by being a woman living in Samburu. There, the traditions are brutal. One of the most devastating is the ritual female circumcision, which involves partially or totally removing the clitoris. This procedure is done without anesthesia, only with a blade, and the girls are subjected to it without choice. This cruel practice is justified by issues of social acceptance, religion, and misinformation, and is seen as a way of guaranteeing purity and making girls fit for marriage, which according to men ends up increasing male pleasure. It is also considered a rite of passage to adulthood in many local cultures. After circumcision, girls, sometimes as young as 12, are given into arranged marriages with men old enough to be their grandfathers. And if you think this practice is cruel enough, just wait until you hear what happens to those who refuse to go through it. Girls who don't accept circumcision face another frightening reality. They risk becoming victims of a practice called beading, which is basically a form of ritualized abuse. And as if that weren't enough, they are also forbidden to have children. It's a real cycle of horrors, all in the name of tradition. Now that you understand what these women face, it's easier to understand the story behind the creation of this women's refuge. Number 3. Location and formation of the village. Umoja village is located in Samburu County in northern Kenya and is strategically positioned on the banks of the Ngiro River, close to the Samburu National Reserve. Its location was handpicked, away from the surrounding villages and about 380 kilometers from Nairobi, ensuring that the women there would find a refuge away from the violent and patriarchal traditions that still dominate the region. After all, the further away from it all, the better, right? But the creation of Umoja didn't happen by chance. The idea came from the courage of Rebecca Lolosoli, a Samburu woman who simply refused to accept the fate imposed on her. Rebecca grew up seeing women treated like commodities. She herself was bought by her husband in exchange for 17 cows. Sounds Absurd? Yes, but it is the reality of many women in Kenya. Unlike most, Rebecca was never silent. She raised her voice against injustice and, as expected, this was not well accepted. In the year 1970, things got even worse with the arrival of British soldiers who used the region as a military training camp. And these soldiers didn't just train, they committed terrible abuses, including mass rapes. Worst of all, the women who survived these horrors were rejected by their own communities. Seen as impure, they were thrown out of the house by their husbands, who were afraid of contracting diseases or simply blamed them for their own abuse. And it was precisely for denouncing these crimes that Rebecca was brutally beaten. What surprised her most, however, was her husband's reaction. He simply didn't care and thought it was normal. At that moment, it hit her. After all, she would die. He would buy another woman and life would go on as if nothing had happened. Before that happened, she ran away. With the help of other women facing similar abuse, she founded the village. There, the aim was clear: to provide shelter for women fleeing rape, forced marriage, genital mutilation, and a host of other abuses. And to ensure their emotional safety, no men are accepted in the village, with the exception of the boys who were born there. Number 4. Number of inhabitants and relationship with tourists. Umoja started out small, with just 15 women looking for a safe place. But over time, this community has grown and is now home to around 50 women and more than 200 children. And the most incredible thing is that the village has become a tourist attraction. Thanks to the internet, this women's refuge has gained worldwide fame. People from all over the world come to the region to get a closer look at this unique village, where the women are the leaders and the men have no place. And it is thanks to this tourism that the community has developed and sustained itself. Number 5. How can there be so many children if men are forbidden? Yes, there are 200 children. In fact, one of the first questions that arises when visiting Umoja is, how can there be so many children if men are forbidden to live in the village? The answer lies in the individual stories of the women who make up the community. Most of the women in Umoja have already arrived with children. They fled arranged marriages, physical abuse, or sexual violence, bringing their children to the village, where they can grow up in an environment free of violence and oppression. These children are nurtured and protected, creating an environment of safety and support. Although men are not allowed as permanent residents, boys who are born in the community are raised there until a certain age, after which they leave to build their own lives outside of Umoja, but always respecting the rules of the village. In addition, many women have relationships with men from outside the community, either from neighboring villages or from other regions. In fact, many young women are planning to get married and have families. The only difference is that they are determined to do this on their own terms, to ensure that their rights are never violated again. Another important detail is that the village also takes in orphans and abandoned children, further expanding the population of children and providing a home for those who have been rejected or neglected. Number 6. How do they support themselves? But back to economic activity. The secret to Umoja's livelihood lies in handicrafts. The women of the village are skilled and create beaded jewelry that is a huge hit with tourists. In addition, they have set up a local safari, where they charge a fee to take visitors to see the region and the community's way of life. And this money isn't just for the basics, such as food and clothing. Over time, they also became owners of the land and started looking after the animals, something that would have been unthinkable in neighboring villages. With the income raised, they built a school to ensure that the children of both the village and the surrounding villages have a different future. Number 7. Education in Vila Umoja. And speaking of the future, education in the village is taken seriously. All the women contribute 10% of what they earn to keep the school running and help the community. In this way, they ensure that children, especially girls, have the chance to study and dream of a different life from the one their mothers had. At school, you don't just learn math and grammar. Children also learn about human rights, equality between men and women, and the value of freedom. It's an education that prepares a new generation to think differently, to break the cycle of violence and oppression. And there's more. The girls learn handicrafts so that they can have a profession and be independent in the future. Health is also important. The women receive information about pregnancy and childbirth so that everything goes smoothly when they have their children, and the fruits are already being reaped. Women from the village have started to teach the same principles of equality and rights to girls and women from neighboring communities. This is generating a wave of change that goes far beyond Umoja. Other villages are springing up, inspired by the example of courage and independence of the women there. Speaking of independence, it's not just in education that the women of Umoja shine. Even in the construction of their homes, they show strength and autonomy. Number 8. How the huts are built. The huts in Umoja follow the traditional amburu style, but with one striking difference. They are built and maintained by the village women themselves. Using local materials such as wood and clay, they build the huts in a simple but extremely functional way. And it's not just in the construction that they excel, they also take care of the maintenance. It's common to arrive in the village and find the women gathered together, carrying out the necessary renovations to the huts, changing leaves or branches on the roof that protects from the scorching sun, or reinforcing the walls. These huts, although simple, are functional and cozy. Inside, with beds made of animal skins and basic utensils, they are perfect for everyday life in the village. And as well as serving as a home, they are also the center of important discussions. It is inside these huts that the women of Umoja gather to make community decisions and strengthen the bonds between them. With all this local strength, it's no surprise that this community has attracted the attention of major international figures. Number 9. Umoja's connection to the West. The story of the women's village went beyond the borders of Africa and gained great visibility in the West. The work of Rebecca and the women of the village has caught the attention of important global figures, and this prominence has opened doors. One proof of this was the Global Leadership Award, which Rebecca received in 2010. This award, presented by the organization Vital Voices, founded by Hillary Clinton, recognizes women who fight for human rights and female empowerment. Another figure who has taken up the cause is Barack Obama. Although he didn't visit the village, Obama repeatedly highlighted Rebecca's work in his speeches on empowering African women, and even criticized those traditions that make no sense and only cause pain. With these connections and support, this refuge has gained even more international attention and resources, proving how a small community can reach the world with the right support. But don't you think all this visibility has come at a price? Number 10. Men's attacks on the village. The visibility that Umoja has achieved has brought many benefits, but also a dark side. The freedom and independence of the women deeply disturbs some men from the surrounding villages. Despite the protection the village offers its residents, it wasn't long before men from neighboring villages, especially angry ex-husbands, tried to invade and cause damage. In the very first years after the foundation, Rebecca Lolosoli's ex-husband led a violent attack, stealing cattle and trying to force some women back into submission. What bothered these men the most? The women's growing financial independence. By selling jewelry and managing local tourism, the women were prospering, something that many men in the villages saw as a threat to their status. And that wasn't all. The money the women earned from handicrafts often became the target of attacks as the men tried to take control of the profits. Just to give you an idea of the size of the backlash, until a few years ago, the men of a neighboring village tried to sabotage Umoja by opening competing craft stores nearby and even attacking the women of the village. But over time, the women of Umoja managed to turn the tables. They bought the land where the village is located, which helped reduce the threats. In addition, they implemented security measures, such as thorn fences around the village, and organized nightly vigils, where they take turns to ensure everyone's safety. Today, attacks are much rarer, and the women still count on the help of their children, who have grown up and now live outside the village. They return periodically to provide support, keep an eye on the cattle, and help protect the village. If you've been fascinated by the impressive and rich history of Umoja, don't stop here. Keep exploring the channel as we have many other amazing destinations for you to discover. Turn on notifications to be the first to know about our upcoming videos. And if you're not already part of our community, sign up now and come and embark on this journey through our Bello Mundo with us. To those of you who have watched so far, thank you very much, and we'll see you on our next adventure.